Welcome to the Enabling Buying Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Kirch, and I'm grateful you're here. Enabling Buying is brought to you by Collavia.com, your all-in-one sales enablement platform. Now, we created this podcast because selling has become more challenging than ever. Buyers are overwhelmed by information, competing priorities, and endless sales messages. In today's environment, success isn't about having the best pitch. It's about understanding how people make decisions, build trust, create meaningful relationships, that move the buyers forward with confidence. Our guest today understands the power of relationship building and what it means to process the selling solutions to clients in the right way. Kelly Stepno is Midwest Managing Director and Chair of APCO's North American Corporate Reputation Practice. Now, she's an attorney with more than 25 years of experiences. She advises organizations on reputation strategy, crisis management, executive positioning, and navigating complex business challenges. Known for her relationship-driven approach, Kelly believes the strongest client partnerships are built through active listening, trust, and a deep understanding of business challenges. She has helped organizations strengthen long-term client relationships while creating opportunities for collaboration, innovation, and growth across industries, including healthcare, consumer goods, food, beverage, manufacturing, education, automotive, and professional services. She has an impressive background, including her previous leadership roles at Booz Allen Hamilton and TMG Strategies, along with her JD and MBA from George Mason University. Join me in welcoming Kelly Stepno to the Enabling Buying Podcast. Kelly Stepno, welcome to the Enabling Buying Podcast. So grateful you're here today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you're very welcome. So we have a really interesting topic to discuss today in some areas that you and I have had some really interesting conversations. And, when we think about the sales world, enabling buying is really centers around helping, buyers make better decisions, but also helping the people that are selling not necessarily push, but really pull people towards buying behavior. But you have an interesting background. You come from a legal background and attorney by training. And you have, you've said multiple times when we talked that you didn't ever consider yourself a salesperson, but here you are in a role where you're very forward facing. And I guess the best way you put it the other day was you said you feel like you're an interpreter when it comes to working with different groups and lawyers and kind of aligning people together. Talk a little bit about what that means to be an interpreter.
Sure. Yeah, so I do have a little bit of a untraditional background, I'll call it. I started in sort of traditional PR communications right out of school, have a journalism background I should say, undergraduate in journalism. And then I sort of fell into crisis and issues and reputation and litigation communications work. And I found that I was constantly finding myself at the table between or with communicators, people leading the business, and attorneys. And so when I went to law school and then eventually got my MBA, I found that because I had the three different perspectives, I was able to sit at the table and kind of interpret and translate some of the things that if I'm sitting there as a GC, I have one perspective. If I'm sitting there running the business, I have another. And if I'm sitting there as a communicator, I'm thinking, okay, we've got to communicate effectively about these things. And so trying to help teams navigate some of the differences that they may have from the perspectives that they're sitting in so we can get to a good place. Again, whether that's a crisis, an issue, litigation communications, and sort of all things in between.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. And, you think about the idea that you've heard this phrase, oh, everyone's a salesperson. I don't buy into that idea. I think I think it kind of waters down what selling is, but it also kind of just really makes some people feel like they're really pressured to do something they weren't born to do.
Right.
But the idea of being someone that's in a sales role is the idea of you're connecting somebody with a buyer that has needs, hopefully. And, obviously not everybody does that well, but you've never seen yourself as a salesperson. You've talked about how you see yourself as somebody who sells every day, but you're not by trade a salesperson. So talk about how you've kind of adapted and what that means to you.
Yeah, so I've been in consulting for my entire career, which is kind of unique. I think sometimes people start in consulting, go in-house, or vice versa, but I've always been on the consulting side of the world. I like the variety. I like the pace. I like all of those things. I have Never. Yes, I went to business school. I'm sure I took a sales course, one of them at some point along the way, but I've never been trained formally in selling and don't really, in my title and in my day to day job have selling as, kind of after my name. But the reality is, because I've been in consulting my entire career, consulting is a business in which you need clients in order to have a consultancy or to consult. And so I've always been in the business of developing relationships, relationship building, looking for ways to understand what existing and potential clients may need, and thinking about how can I pull those things together, right? The things that in my consulting career I've had access to in the organizations that I've worked with and what my clients need, and thinking about getting them information and helping them along the way, frankly, with not a desire to immediately have instant gratification, like, okay, Kelly, now we're going to hire you, right?
Yeah.
In a relationship building business, that's not what it's about. Sure, you have traditional RFP approaches and things like that, but it's really about understanding at a fundamental level what your clients need, thinking about how you might be able to plug the hole, and then sharing things that maybe at some point get your client or prospective client to say, you know what, yeah, let's talk more.
Yeah, I love that. And I when I first thought, okay, sales is a good progression, because I was in a operations role and I wanted to move into starting my own company. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't grow up in that kind of environment at the time. I thought, well, maybe sales is the closest thing to being an entrepreneur, because you can own your own book of business, and
Right.
it was a really great progression. But I thought, well, I like to talk. I'm going to be good at this. And it's like when I took improv comedy, they teach you that if you try and be funny, sometimes you destroy the scenes. And so it's like you have to let things build. And
Right.
in sales, I think so many people get into it thinking they're going to talk people into buying. CRMs, slide decks, inboxes. Sales teams don't need more scattered tools. They need alignment. Collavia brings your sales playbook, AI coaching, training, and goals together in one platform for consultative B2B teams looking to close more deals with less confusion and greater consistency. Collavia, enabling buying in a world of selling. Visit Collavia.com. They're always pitching. They're always looking for ways to kind of push their services on someone. And you've worked in with some fairly large organizations. That model doesn't work today, right? I mean,
No.
this is a very consultative, long sales process. Can you talk a little bit about the distinction there? Because I think sometimes people think they can talk their way into getting business.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually think one of the biggest traits of being a good quote unquote salesperson is being able to listen. And that's very, to your point, counter to what people think. People do think, oh, well, if I get in a room and I talk to them enough and I just hammer them with all of the things, that it's going to result in, great new business. And that's really, again, not how I've ever looked at it. I mean, I've been brought up in the business on the consulting side by people who were very, very, very good at selling, even though that was not their role. Because again, it was sort of this client forward thinking and a lot of listening. With my existing clients, I spend a lot of time listening, because your clients will tell you a lot of things. And then from that, you can take away, oh, I think I heard this and I think I heard this. Maybe I can phone a friend over here at my organization and we can have a follow up conversation on that. But if you go in like a bull in a china closet and think, I'm just going to, talk you to death, or I'm just going to send you a whole bunch of stuff and just assume that something's going to land without the context and the perspective that goes along with that, that's really not where things are nowadays. I spent the early part of my career doing tons and tons of RFP responses, which is a very traditional way, as you know, of doing things. You get an RFP, we give you, here's the 49 million things we can do that fit the RFP, and then we go on and we see if we have business. The later in my career I've gotten, there's less and less of that, because so much of what we do on the consulting side of the business is really about, have you done a good job with your existing clients? A lot of my clients come because I have great clients who say, hey, have you talked to Kelly? You really should. I think, Kelly helped me with this. I think she could help you with that. And that comes again from really deep relationship building. That's not just in and out. It's not networking for networking's sake. I always say, people go to networking and they're like, oh, okay, I met 3 people and I sent them one thing afterward. that's not going to get you the business. You have to develop a relationship. Say, oh my gosh, it was so great, and I go with intentionality to networking and thinking about, okay, I want to create deep and meaningful relationships. I moved to Chicago 5 years ago, so it's been super important for me to get into the marketplace and do some of these things. But again, it comes with intentionality and not in June 2026, I emailed you after an event, and then I saw in the news something was happening to your organization in March 2027, and that was the only other time I reached to you. That's not going to get you the business in the way I think sometimes people assume. Well, if I've made the connects, I'm sure what I send them, is going to land.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine that he sells very large, we'll just say, construction equipment. And if he makes a sale a year, it's a good year.
Yeah.
So 1 year, the commission could, carry him for a couple of years. And it has had to at times because
Right.
you talked about when we spoke about how you had an engagement where you took 19 months
Mm-hmm.
to close the business. Now, what's interesting about that is that's not 19 months of you sitting there waiting for them to respond. That's 19 months of you keeping them engaged and
Yes.
following up. What does it take to keep that relationship going like that when there's maybe even times where there's no traction, no budget, no interest? What was that process like?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It was 19 months. It's the longest sales cycle, quote unquote, that I've been part of. And, it was about connecting with someone, at an event where I thought, okay, you know what? A lot of what they're saying seems a lot like things we could help with. And again, being a good listener, then following up afterward, great to meet you. Here's a few things I heard you say, and here's a couple of resources that we have that you might want to take a look at. And then some back and forth, like, thanks, appreciate the information, keep me on the list. We do things here where at my organization where we will do convenings. So bring smart people to sit around a table and talk about similar challenges or potential opportunity and those kinds of things. So it was always a couple of invites to things like that, because again, I'm a big believer in bringing smart people together, regardless of whether or not sales come out of it or not. It's just nice to, I think, get, again, smart people into a room. And then it was, as things were progressing, thinking more and more about being intentional about engagements. Hey, can we grab half an hour? Can we grab a coffee? Again, not to sell like, oh, you should hire us, but rather, hey, tell me more about what you're hearing. Hey, you were wrestling with this problem before. Did you solve it? Hey, I've got some other clients that I've been connecting with, and I want to share, obviously not breaking any confidentiality, but a few tidbits that I'm seeing across an industry and those kinds of things. And that's really kind of what gets the momentum going. If you can have this constant connection and touch points along the way. And then, yeah, eventually what happens is, hey, you've been telling me a lot about this. We're at a moment, to your point. Now maybe the stars align and there's some budget, or there's a more pressing need, or there's a reason. But then people will pick up the phone and call and don't have to go through the multi-step process of an RFP, but actually you can sit and say, yeah, of course we can help you. Here's what we might be able to do, and get to it that way. So while it takes a while, I think in the long run, it's a much more satisfying approach, because again, I'm really focused on driving and having deep relationships and not just having it be transactional.
And if you make it about their needs instead of your own,
Exactly.
you go from being a salesperson to a resource. And years ago, I had a mentor that always instilled in us, be a resource. And,
That's right.
I've had countless times in my career where I had somebody that there was no opportunity at the moment, or they weren't responsive. And I would send them, hey, I saw this article I thought you might be interested in. Or,
Exactly.
wow, I
Exactly.
just saw this really neat presentation that I thought I'd share. You send stuff that is not salesy, it's not marketing, it's helpful. And now all of a sudden they see you differently. Because if everything you send is
That's right.
company collateral
Right.
or one
Right.
pagers, then
That's exactly right.
it's yeah.
Or you say, hey, come along to an event with me. There's a
Yeah.
topic, someone's speaking about things that I think you might be interested in. There's another way to open up the aperture and again continue to get to that less transactional, much more relationship driven engagement.
Yeah, and sometimes when we have clients that are eager to buy and they are in a place where they're ready to buy, we have to do our job to not just jump on that and say, "Oh, this is what you need. Great, we're selling it to you." Because sometimes as a consultant, as you have always tried to be throughout your career, you have to advise them down the right path. And you shared a story where you had somebody that they wanted to basically be on the front page of a large publication, costly, not necessarily the most valuable direction. Can you talk about how you were able to work with them to help them
Yeah.
come up with a better solution?
Yeah, so I've reached the stage in my career, and I think the evolution of kind of the industry I'm in from a consulting perspective is you used to get requests from your clients or prospective clients, and they would say, "This is what I want," and you'd say, "Okay, yep, we can deliver that." And I've tried really hard to think differently and to not just say, "Yes, we can deliver that," because we may be able to deliver it, but I want to understand why you want that. And so I spend a lot of time, again, not just listening, but also probing and asking questions. What are you trying to achieve? What are the business objectives you're trying to meet? Why do you think that's going to help you get there? And depending on the answers, in some cases it is, okay, yep, actually that makes sense based upon what you're trying to do, the impact you're trying to have, the goals you're trying to achieve, et cetera, that will get you there. In some cases it's not. And you frankly have to have the courage to say, I hear you, but based upon what you're sharing, I think what actually could work better is this approach. And I've been very fortunate, in particular in the last, I'd say 3, 4, 5 years, where clients are I think, in a place where they're more willing to have those conversations. Because when you think about clients who are, kind of buying a service from you, I'd like to refer to it more as a partnership. They're really making a decision that reflects on them, certainly professionally, but maybe even personally. And so they also want to make sure they're doing the right thing. And if we're saying, hey, that may not be the right path, here's something that can, be even better for what you're trying to achieve. I think our clients are in a place where they're really happy to have that conversation now and really willing to listen and
Yeah.
to evolve some of the things that they think they might want, but rather hear from experts. We're obviously experts in our field. Like, okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. Okay, what's the approach then if that's what we're doing?
Yeah, and I think a lot of salespeople are so eager to get that yes that they are saying yes to things that they shouldn't. And you mentioned having more experience and being at a point in your career where you have a little bit more confidence. And I think that's where a lot of sales leaders do maybe a disservice to their teams, not empowering them to say no, because sometimes saying no is the right thing to bring the client to a better place. Can you talk a little bit about some of those experiences?
Yeah, I mean, look, I can tell you a number of times where I may have said to a client, this isn't right for us. Let me connect you with someone who it is right for, and let me be that bridge. I don't ever want to do work for a client where it doesn't make sense for us to be the ones doing the work for any number of different reasons. And then again, I think you do have to empower the team around you to have the courage to ask the questions and say, hey, appreciate this is what you're asking for, but can we just have a quick conversation and ask a few questions and then come back and say, look, again, while we might be able to do that, that probably isn't the best path for what you're trying to achieve. Here's a couple of options that might be better for that. And I think it is about empowering people. And your client might say no. Now, you may decide, okay, again, we can do it. You're just not going to get the impact that you thought you were going to get. Or you might say, because you're not going to get the impact, it's actually not right for us because we're going to
Yeah.
set everyone up for failure. And that's not good for anybody. I'd rather protect a long-term relationship or a longer term relationship than say, sure, we can do it. And you're going to get the impact you want, even if we know that they're not. And that's what I love about my organization. Like, we're very good about asking those questions about steering prospective clients and existing clients in a way that makes sense for what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and sometimes within organizations, I think salespeople maybe get a bad rap, but sometimes it's maybe deserved because the idea that we overpromise and then operations has to deliver. But what you're describing there isn't just about doing the right thing for the company overall. I mean, maybe there's some internal teams that are really going to take the brunt if you take that business on.
Right.
And sometimes we have to look out for those teams that are basically doing the heavy lifting internally,
Yep.
and
Agreed.
being able to say no. Are there times where you've seen projects come in or jobs won that ended up creating a lot of internal strife?
I mean, look, I'm in consulting, so of course the answer is yes. It'd be impossible to be in consulting to not say that.
Yeah.
So yes, of course. I mean, there are times where you have either maybe an existing client or again, a prospective client comes in the door, you know, has some ideas about what they want, prescriptive ideas. More likely it's when there's a very prescriptive idea or thinking or approach that a prospective client or client wants to take. And I think when we know we can achieve it, but it's still, again, there may be that gap between what they're hoping the impact will be and the reality of what the impact is. I think that's where sometimes you see the kind of stress or the potential consternation by the teams who are working on it, because they're marching toward hey, we've got this statement of work. We're marching toward that statement of work or the brief and the things that we're supposed to do. But we know ultimately that it maybe isn't meeting the mail when the client is thinking about the impact they're trying to have. And in
Yeah.
some cases, again, maybe we knew that at the start, but thought, okay, we can get in there and kind of shape some things. And maybe that doesn't always work the way we intended it to work. Like, oh, we'll get in and we'll change their minds. Actually, probably not. And that's something I've learned. Like, probably not. It's kind of like a relationship. Like, you get what you get out of the gate, and if you think you're going to change it, you're probably, it's a false narrative. So again, I think we've done a much better job. One, because I think our clients and prospective clients are willing again to have these conversations, because they're spending money at a time where budgets are so constrained. And so of course they want to think about, where can I get the best impact? And I think they recognize having the conversations with us who have a number of clients in different industries to be able to say, hey, we've seen this work and we've seen this not work. And what does that ultimately mean for you? I think it used to be harder in the past, where it was much more nope, this is what I want, please try to get it.
Yeah, with your background, I'm sure you've experienced a lot of different scenarios, and especially in consulting, having legal background. But one area that I think is really a critical discussion today is reputation management, because the idea that you can make mistakes and hide from it today, it's like, man, with online reviews or somebody could send an email out, your name could be mud very quickly if somebody views the experience as a poor one. So what are some of the mistakes you think that destroy trust maybe faster than organizations realize?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I will say that there's been quite an evolution if you think about corporate reputation and organizations' reputation. It used to be that because reputation was hard to measure, there was a lot of, I would say, different opinions about how much effort you should put into your reputation as an organization. Nowadays, for the very reasons you just mentioned, a reputation has become a business asset, and it is a focus of many of the clients that we work with, and an understanding that given how fast things move nowadays, it takes, there's a famous quote where, it takes years to build up a reputation and something like, a couple minutes to destroy it if you make the wrong decisions and say the wrong things. I think if you with clients who are wrestling with that, there are any number of things that can drive people to lose confidence in an organization. One being very simply not being transparent, right? You don't have to share everything with the whole world, but it's very clear when an organization is not being transparent with its stakeholders. And stakeholders know that, and they understand that, and they make decisions based on it. The second thing is staying true to your mission, value, as an organization. What have you been talking about from the dawn of your organization's birth, in terms of, this is what we're focused on, these are our values, etc. Especially nowadays, stakeholders are really looking at that. Are you staying true to your values? Are you living up to what I, as a consumer, believe you have promised me? So that's another big one. And then I think partly it's not being as strategic with the things that you're doing externally. I think that if you have a strategy about the way you engage with stakeholders that is consistent, and is just like we were talking about with relationships for clients, prospective clients, and quote unquote selling, It's a very similar thing when you think about external stakeholders in an organization. There's an expectation of a cadence of engagement that they're going to have with you that they're going to expect. And if that starts to change, then they're going to start asking questions. Well, why is that changing? And what's happening
Yeah.
here? And those kinds of things. And of course, then there's all of the big controversies that happen that, of course, in 48 seconds can have a really negative impact on an organization's reputation. I will say, especially given all of the data we have nowadays, as long as organizations are really paying attention and seeing how things are moving and playing out how things are moving, then you have a better opportunity of kind of protecting that relationship with your stakeholders and hopefully having them give you the benefit of the doubt, even if there are some troubling times.
Yeah, and the damage that can be done from a couple of bad experiences, especially if you're an organization that relies on things like Google reviews or things like
Yes,
that. I mean,
for
you can
sure.
literally destroy a business by giving a series of bad reviews. I think back to when we've all experienced it. A retail setting, you go in and you have a bad experience. You're trying to buy a car, you're trying to buy a refrigerator, and you feel like you're being misled or they're trying
Right.
to jack the prices up. But if they do the right things and you end up walking out there feeling, wow, they really turned that around, that last experience is the one that matters most.
Well,
Is
that's
that
exactly right.
true in large organizations? And do you see that there are some things that you've experienced where you took some really tough situations and turned them around?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is the last experience that stakeholders have with you. So, I worked crisis and still work crisis to some degree for many years. And when I would sit with organizations that were experiencing a crisis, it's always about, okay, what do we know about what happened? What are we going to say about it? And then paying attention to how that's landing, right? Because maybe there's something that you think, oh, it's totally clear what happened here, and it's totally clear messaging, and everybody's going to fully appreciate why this went the way that it did. And then you start to realize, if you're paying attention and collecting some data, that actually, no, you know what, that's not landing the way we thought about.
Yeah.
So, how do you course correct and make sure that the information that people are getting from you is the information that you want them to be receiving the way you want them to receive it? And if they're not, what do you have to do to make sure that that context gets out there? Because otherwise, you're thinking, okay, we're putting this out there and people are going to see and understand, and it's landing completely differently. And that too can extend the impact of on your reputation if something is happening at a big organization.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about AI last time too, and I guess my follow up question to that, just as we close this out, is: do you think AI creates more reputation risk?
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, AI absolutely creates more reputation risk with the pace of technology, with the pace of AI. If you think about, we were just talking about this the other day, when you have stakeholders, you think, okay, policymakers, you think consumers, you think employees. Well, now we're thinking about LLMs as an audience because LLMs are taking your information and translating that everywhere. No one's
yeah,
going anymore, not anymore, but people aren't as often going, for example, to websites. Let me look at the information. They're going to an LLM and they're like, tell me all about this. And so thinking about the LLMs as an audience and the way the LLMs are translating information for your stakeholders, in particular, if you have a crisis or an issue or a reputation threat, is super important because it could be, again, that you're putting out the information the way you think it's going to be received in the context that you think people are going to absorb it. But because you have the prism of the LLMs, that may not actually be what's happening. And so it really does have some reputational risk with it. Now, the flip side of it is there's some great things with AI, right? You can get to data quicker, you can test things out quicker, you can do some other things. But that's when you think about reputation, what you really need to be thinking about.
yeah, and I also think the other thing that is going to become a currency at some point is authenticity,
Yes.
because I think that there's somebody put so much trust in what they read through AI
Yeah.
or they receive, and we all know that AI can hallucinate.
Right.
There's lots of information we're reading that's supposed to be credited back to another resource, and the resource doesn't even exist or it's not
Right.
reliable. So I
Right.
think the more authentic we become as humans, like everything we talked about today, is about building authentic relationships.
Yeah.
And Kelly, I want to thank you for coming on today. This has been amazing. You've given so many great insights. As we close this out, do you have any tips for anybody out there that's going, you know what, I want to approach my relationships with more authenticity?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And a couple of things. Look, I think the most simplest of the tips is don't think about it as selling, think about it as relationship building. Um, that alone, I think, allows you to come at it with authenticity and a perspective that's very different if you just shift your mindset a little bit. On the relationship building front, it's a lot of what we talked about, which is this idea of if you want to be authentic or seen as authentic, you have to be authentic. Meaning, I'm going to reach to you and connect with you, even if I'm not going to get business out of it. Because again, I've seen things that I think are of interest to you, or I know that I'm going to an event that I think you would love to attend, and sharing insights that, again, you're maybe not a client yet, but I'm going to share them anyway because I think it matters to you. And then, the final point, we raised it earlier, the same way that in your role for me as a consultant, have a reputation to protect, our clients do as well. And if they're going to make these hard decisions about spending money in a resource constrained environment, they need to understand that they're making the right decision. And that doesn't come from a transactional engagement or hey, I talked to this person one time in 18 months. It really comes from an ongoing engagement, relationship, etc.
Well, and I think this is true of you, and I personally believe this is the way we should live. That imagine if we all saw our clients as someone we wanted to serve and help make their life better instead of just getting something from them.
Right.
And I think
Right.
that is such a challenge for young salespeople and sales leaders out there that are pressed for numbers. If we make it about genuine relationships, it's how we make the world better. And thank you for being on here, and I'm looking forward to us expanding our relationship. Kelly Stepno, thanks again for being on the Enabling Buying podcast.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.